The 9,586th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. At the outset of the meeting, I should like, at the request of the delegation of the Russian Federation and on behalf of the members of the Security Council, to ask that all those present now stand and join in observing a minute of silence to present its condolences and sympathy to the government and people of Russia, and in the memory of victims of the heinous and cowardly terrorist attack at the concert hall in Moscow region, the Russian Federation, on 22nd of March. I now invite you to stand and observe a minute of silence. I thank you. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Israel and Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I propose that the Council invite the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in the meeting in accordance with the Provisional Rules of Procedure and previous practice in this regard. There be no objection. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2024/254, the text of the draft resolution submitted by Algeria, Ecuador, Guyana, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, and Switzerland. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements before the vote. I give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, I have the honor to introduce this draft resolution on behalf of the 10 elected members of the Security Council, namely Algeria, Ecuador, Guyana, Japan, Malta, Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, Switzerland, and my own country, Mozambique. We wish to commend the Presidency of Japan for convening this meeting in order to take action on this important resolution on the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. We express our deep appreciation to all members of this Council for their efforts and inputs on this draft resolution aimed at ending the catastrophic situation in the Gaza Strip. Mr. President, the situation in Gaza is a matter of grave concern to the entire international community. Indeed, the escalation of the conflict in the Gaza Strip and its catastrophic consequences are a clear threat to international peace and security. In this context, the E10 felt compelled to table this draft resolution before you. The 15 members of this Council, individually and collectively, have a mandate under the Charter to work for the maintenance of international peace and security, and their actions impact the entire international community. This is the strong conviction that led to the drafting of the text that we are considering this morning. This Council has been consistently unanimous in its agreement on the obligation of the parties in conflict to respect international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. D10 have always supported the call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza as a fundamental step. For this reason, and in respect for the holy month of Ramadan, we have proposed the present resolution that demands an immediate ceasefire during this sacred period, leading to a permanent and sustainable ceasefire. At the same time, the draft resolution demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and emphasizes that humanitarian access must be allowed to address their medical and other humanitarian needs. These have been among our key demands for weeks. The draft resolution further demands that the parties comply with their obligations under international law, as we said before, including international humanitarian law and human rights law. The draft resolution also emphasizes the need for the parties to abide by the pertinent resolutions adopted by this Council, including resolutions 2712 and 2720 of 2023. The E10 have adopted a consultative approach during the negotiation process of this text. We have consulted extensively and in good faith with all members of this Council in a frank, open, and flexible manner, with the aim of achieving a text that addresses the situation in Gaza. The adoption of this draft resolution will certainly be another important step this Council can build upon to comprehensively address the crisis in Gaza. Given the utmost urgency of the situation, we call upon all members of this Council, all and each member of this Council, to vote in favor of this resolution. While this resolution is crucial, it is essential that we continue working towards a comprehensive ceasefire and a lasting peace in the region. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, Мы весьма разочарованы и озадачены, как велась работа над проектом резолюции в последние 24 часа. О том, что слово «permanent» в оперативном параграфе 1 применительно к прекращению огня предлагается заменить на более слабую формулировку, мы узнали чуть более чем за час до начала заседания. Это недопустимо. Мы все получали инструкции на голосование по тексту, в котором было слово «permanent», и считаем это принципиально важным. Все остальные формулировки оставляют слишком большое поле для интерпретаций, что может позволить Израилю возобновить военную операцию в секторе Газа в любой момент после истечения прекращения огня, которое, надеемся, сегодня будет установлено. С тем, чтобы избежать такого сценария, мы хотим внести в текст устную поправку и вернуть слово «permanent» в оперативный параграф 1. Таким образом, он будет звучать так, как это звучало в прежде изданной резолюции, а именно demands an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, respected by all parties, leading to a permanent sustainable ceasefire, and also demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as ensuring humanitarian access to address their medical and other humanitarian needs, and further demands that the parties comply with their obligations under international law in relation to all persons they detain. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for their statement. Members of the Council have before them a proposed amendment submitted by Russian Federation to the text of the draft resolution contained in the document S/2024/254 submitted by Algeria, Ecuador, Guyana, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, and Switzerland. Rule 36 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure states, inter alia, the following. When an amendment adds to or deletes from the text of a motion or draft resolution, that amendment shall be voted on first. Accordingly, I intend to put the proposed amendment to the vote first. Will those in favor of proposed amendment please raise their hand? Against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows. 3 votes in favor, 1 vote against, 11 abstentions. The proposed amendment has not been adopted, having failed to obtain the required number of votes. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/254 please raise their hand? Those against? Abstention? The result of the voting is as follows. 14 votes in favor, 0 vote against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2728, 2024. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. أود أن أشكر جميع أعضاء المجلس على المرونة والعمل البناء الذي مكننا اليوم من اعتماد قرار طال انتظاره، قرار يطلب وقف إطلاق النار بغزة فوراً من أجل وضع حد للمجازر التي لا تزال للأسف مستمرة منذ أكثر من 5 أشهر. 5 أشهر ذاق خلالها الشعب الفلسطيني كل أشكال العذاب، كل أشكال المعاناة. لقد استمر حمام الدم طويلاً وبأشكال بشعة، وأصبح من الواجب وضع حد له قبل فوات الأوان. أخيراً يرتقي مجلس الأمن لحجم المسؤوليات التي تقع عليه باعتباره المسؤول الأول عن حفظ السلم والأمن الدوليين، ويستجب لمطالب الشعوب والمجموعة الدولية، كما نادي بها مراراً وتكراراً السيد الأمين العام أنطونيو غوتيريش، الذي نجدد له الدعم على موقفه النبيل ومناصرته للحق، وهذا رغم الحملات المغرضة التي يتعرض لها. سيد الرئيس، عند التصويت على مشروع قرار التي تقدمت به الجزائر الشهر الماضي، وعدنا بأننا لن نكل ولن نمل حتى يتحمل مجلس الأمن مسؤولياته كاملة غير منقوصة، ووعدنا بأننا سنعود لنقرع مجدداً أبواب مجلس الأمن. وها قد عدنا اليوم مع جميع الدول المنتخبة بالمجلس في رسالة واضحة للشعب الفلسطيني، مفادها أن المجموعة الدولية بمختلف أطيافها تشعر ولم تتخلى عنكم، تشعر بآلامكم ولم تتخلى عنكم. سيد الرئيس، إن اعتماد قرار اليوم ما هو إلا بداية نحو تحقيق آمال الشعب الفلسطيني، ونتطلع بالتزام المحتل الإسرائيلي بهذا القرار، وأن يتوقف القتل فوراً ومن دون شروط، وترفع المعاناة عن الشعب الفلسطيني. ومجلس الأمن من واجبه أن يسهر على ضمان تنفيذ أحكام هذا القرار. في الأخير سيد الرئيس، أؤكد أن الجزائر ستعود قريباً لتخاطب مجلس الأمن مرة أخرى في ظل توجيهات رئيس الجمهورية السيد عبد المجيد تبون، حتى تكون دولة فلسطين في مكانها الطبيعي عضواً كاملاً وسيداً بالأمم المتحدة. وشكراً.
I thank the representative of Algeria for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the top, I want to express my deepest condolences to the families and loved ones of last week's terrorist attack in Moscow. We condemn terrorism in all its forms and stand in solidarity with the Russian people in grieving the loss of life from this horrific event. Colleagues, today this Council spoke out in support of the ongoing diplomatic efforts led by the United States, Qatar, Egypt, to bring about an immediate and sustainable ceasefire, secure the immediate release of all hostages, and help alleviate the tremendous suffering of Palestinian civilians in Gaza who are in dire need of protection and life-saving humanitarian assistance. The United States fully supports these critical objectives. In fact, they were the foundation of the resolution we put forward last week, a resolution that Russia and China vetoed. But colleagues, the United States' support for these objectives is not simply rhetorical. We're working around the clock to make them real, on the ground, through diplomacy, because we know that it is only through diplomacy that we can push this agenda forward. We're getting closer to a deal for an immediate ceasefire with the release of all hostages, but we're not there yet. Now let's be clear. A ceasefire could have come about months ago if Hamas had been willing to release hostages, months ago. Instead, Hamas continues to stand in the way of peace, to throw up roadblocks, cower in tunnels beneath Gaza cities and behind under civilian infrastructure and hide among the civilian population. So today my ask to members of this council and to member states in every region of the world is this: speak out and demand unequivocally that Hamas accepts the deal on the table. Now, I hope I'm wrong, I really do, but I don't expect that from Russia and China, especially because they still can't bring themselves to condemn Hamas's terrorist attacks on October 7th. Just last week, Russia and China vetoed a resolution that condemned this horrific attack, a resolution the vast majority of this council supported. They have shown time and time again that they are not actually interested in advancing a durable peace through diplomatic efforts, nor for all their rhetoric are they interested in making any meaningful contributions to humanitarian efforts. Instead, they are using this devastating conflict as a political cudgel to try to divide this council at a time when we need to come together. It is deeply, deeply cynical, and we should all see through it. Colleagues, we appreciated the willingness of members of this council to take some of our edits and improve on this resolution. Still, certain key edits were ignored, including our request to add a condemnation of Hamas. And we did not agree with everything in the resolution. For that reason, we were unfortunately not able to vote yes. However, as I've said before, we fully support some of the critical objectives in this non-binding resolution, and we believe it was important for the Council to speak out and make clear that our any ceasefire must come with the release of all hostages. Indeed, as I've said before, the only path to a durable end to this conflict is the release of all hostages. Critically, a ceasefire and the release of hostages will allow much more humanitarian aid to get into Gaza at a time when famine is looming large, and provide an opportunity to work toward a sustainable cessation of hostilities, toward a future where Hamas can no longer threaten Israel and never repeat October 7th, and no longer control Gaza and use civilians as shields, toward a future where Palestinians and Israelis live side by side in peace in two democratic states of their own. Something that will never happen with Hamas, a terrorist organization dedicated to the destruction of Israel and the killing of Jews, a terrorist organization this body still fails to condemn, controlling Gaza. Colleagues, we meet during the holy month of Ramadan. This should be a season of peace for Muslim communities around the world. Just as October 7th, Simchat Torah, should have been a day of peace for Jewish communities. This resolution rightly acknowledges that during the month of Ramadan, we must recommit to peace. Hamas can do that by accepting the deal on the table. A ceasefire can begin immediately with the release of the first hostage. And so we must put pressure on Hamas to do just that. This is the only path to securing a ceasefire and the release of hostages, as we have all called for today. That is what this resolution means. A ceasefire of any duration must come with the release of hostages. This is the only path. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Today is an important day. Most of all, we hope it will signal an important day for the people of the Middle East, a day that will help silence the guns, stop the killing, free the hostages, as well as bring some calm to and clear the sky over Gaza. The day that marks the beginning of the end of pain and suffering of civilians. This is a significant day for the elected members. We found our voice of an unifying force inside the Council. This is the reason why we are on the Council. We showed the leadership for peace. And it is a good day for the whole Council, as we aligned our efforts and decision with the calls coming from the UN General Assembly and the UN Secretary General, from the humanitarian organizations, and from the world public. We demonstrated that we can find unity for peace, a small step in rebuilding trust in the Council. Today's resolution is just the beginning. We will need more of this unity for Gaza, as well as for many other conflicts, and Slovenia is ready. Mr. President, I don't need, but I wish to thank my colleagues, the elected members, as we went through the process together. This is Slovenia's third month on the Council, and we are looking forward to many more joint ventures together in search of peace. I wanted to thank the permanent members for giving us a chance, for having trust in the power of the EU10, and for being patient during negotiations. Mr. President, we delivered the strongest signal thus far. We demand an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan leading to lasting, sustainable ceasefire. It is a call we have all been desperate to hear from the Council. A short and focused resolution is a firm sign from the Council that this conflict must stop. It offers an opportunity for peace for Palestinians and an opportunity for diplomatic efforts, including those of Egypt, Qatar, and the US, to continue. We express our appreciation for the commitment of the Secretary General, UN staff members on the ground, humanitarian coordinators, as well as for the leadership of different UN agencies, humanitarian and health organizations, including UNRWA. We recall the binding nature of the Security Council resolutions and call for swift implementation of this clear resolution, in particular with regards to the ceasefire, the unconditional release of hostages, and the urgent need for expansion of the flow of humanitarian aid. We also reiterate our call for full respect of international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today's adoption of the resolution proposed by the E10, including the Republic of Korea, has a historic meaning in that it is the very first resolution by this Council that demands a ceasefire in Gaza. After numerous attempts by the Council and consistent appeals by the UN Secretary General, OCHA, and so on, amid rising death tolls. It is also significant that this is the first ever resolution introduced by the E10 and adopted on a Security Council regional agenda item. As one of the E10, the Republic of Korea is pleased by today's adoption of the resolution and commends the dedicated efforts of all E10 colleagues, including Mozambique, E10 coordinator, Algeria, representing the views of the Arab world, and Japan, the presidency of the Council, in the process of drafting and negotiating the resolution. In addition, we appreciate the cooperation of the P5, in particular the US, for its sincere and utmost coordination with the E10 in the spirit of compromise. In order for today's resolution to have concrete significance beyond the internal politics of the Security Council, it must have a tangible impact on the situation in the Gaza Strip by saving the lives of innocent civilians and easing the humanitarian crisis. The situation on the ground in Gaza must be different before and after this resolution. This will only be possible when both Israel and Hamas respect and faithfully implement this resolution. Even though it is not explicitly coercive under Chapter 7 of the Charter, the parties to the conflict must bear in mind that this resolution reflects the consensus of the international community, one forged through active discussion in the Security Council and General Assembly for more than 5 months. The most important thing is implementing the ceasefire starting right now. As defined in the resolution, violence and firing must be ceased immediately. Hostages taken by Hamas and other groups must be returned to their families right away. Barriers to the provision of humanitarian assistance must be lifted. The entire international community must also actively cooperate to save civilian lives and overcome acute food insecurity through humanitarian aid at scale. Restore basic public order and improve Gaza's fundamental public services, including health and sanitation. And based on these achievements, preparations for redoubled political and diplomatic dialogue to resolve the Palestinian question in the long term must commence step by step. All parties will have to take a step back and respond to the global call to participate in the cause of restoring peace and humanity. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Republic of Korea for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. At the offset, I wish to express our condolences to the Russian Federation for the atrocious terrorist attack of last week. We condemn all terrorism in all its form. Malta was proud to co-pen this resolution, which we have just adopted, which calls for a ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, leading to a lasting, sustainable ceasefire. With this resolution, the Security Council has clearly spoken out on the urgent and pressing need to stop the fighting. This is critical to alleviate the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. This resolution must now be immediately and unconditionally implemented by all parties. The fighting needs to stop without further delays. All hostages must be safely released. On this occasion, we also express our appreciation and support for the ongoing negotiations by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. We sincerely hope that these diplomatic efforts can lead to tangible results in the coming days. Meanwhile, humanitarian access to the Gaza Strip is of critical importance to avert the risk of famine. There is the urgent need to expand the flow of humanitarian assistance and in demanding the lifting of all barriers preventing the necessary humanitarian assistance as requested by this resolution. In closing, President, a sustainable ceasefire must also be accompanied by a political urgency to build a durable foundation for peace. Malta reaffirms its commitment to a just and comprehensive resolution of the conflict based on a two-state solution along the pre-1967 borders, addressing the legitimate aspirations of both sides, with Jerusalem as a future capital of two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security, in line with the relevant Security Council resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président, la France se félicite de l'adoption de la résolution 2728. Plus de 5 mois après le début de la crise à Gaza, provoquée par l'attaque terroriste du Hamas, il était temps que le Conseil de sécurité puisse enfin agir. Il était temps qu'il établisse un cessez-le-feu. Il était temps qu'il exige la libération des otages. Il était temps qu'il réclame un accès humanitaire complet et une aide massive alors que la famine sévit à Gaza. L'adoption de cette résolution montre que le Conseil de sécurité peut encore agir quand tous ses membres font les efforts nécessaires pour qu'il puisse remplir son mandat. Je tiens à cet égard à saluer personnellement le rôle de la représentante permanente des États-Unis. Le silence du Conseil de sécurité sur Gaza devenait assourdissant. Il est temps qu'il puisse enfin contribuer à une sortie de crise. Celle-ci n'est pas terminée, hélas, et notre Conseil va devoir rester mobilisé et immédiatement se remettre à la tâche. Il va devoir, après le Ramadan, qui se termine dans 2 semaines, établir un cessez-le-feu permanent. Il lui faudra œuvrer au relèvement et à la stabilisation de Gaza. Enfin et surtout, le Conseil de sécurité aura à remettre un processus politique sur les rails visant à l'établissement de la solution des 2 États, la seule à même de garantir la paix. Notre Conseil ne pourra naturellement se substituer aux partis, mais son rôle sera central. La France prendra ses responsabilités et proposera dans les jours qui viennent une initiative au Conseil de sécurité. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La Suisse a voté en faveur de ce projet de résolution et salue son adoption par le Conseil de sécurité. C'est enfin un signe d'espoir. Car ce vote doit marquer un retour vers plus d'humanité dans le conflit au Proche-Orient. La dignité humaine et la décence doivent nous définir comme communauté globale. Voici comment le secrétaire général des Nations Unies, que je voudrais, avec toutes et toutes les humanitaires engagés, remercier, a souligné cette nécessité hier au point de passage de Rafah. Le vote d'aujourd'hui démontre l'importance et le poids que les membres élus peuvent avoir lorsque les blocages du Conseil perturbent l'exercice de son mandat. Mon pays, la Suisse, a travaillé sans relâche avec tous les membres du Conseil, que je voudrais remercier ici, pour faire adopter cette résolution, dans un esprit toujours solidaire et constructif, conscient du mandat que l'Assemblée générale nous a confié en nous élisant et de notre propre priorité, qui est de protéger les civils. Nous avions un objectif commun clair, adresser aux parties au conflit une demande limpide et sans équivoque de mettre en place un cessez-le-feu immédiat menant à un cessez-le-feu durable. Il était grand temps que cette demande fasse enfin l'objet de consensus au sein de ce Conseil. Un cessez-le-feu immédiat est une étape prioritaire, mais c'est seulement le premier pas, vu la situation humanitaire catastrophique à Gaza. Cela fait presque 6 mois que les civils, à commencer par les enfants et les centaines de milliers de déplacés, sont en proie aux bombardements quotidiens, au risque de famine et d'épidémie, au lieu d'aller à l'école ou au travail sans danger. Cela doit cesser immédiatement. La mise en œuvre de cette résolution doit aider à fournir à la population civile l'aide humanitaire dont elle a besoin par toutes les modalités d'accès possibles, de même que de prodiguer les soins médicaux, restaurer les infrastructures médicales, soulager le personnel médical et lui permettre d'accomplir à lui aussi sa mission sans danger. La résolution formule aussi une demande claire pour la libération immédiate et inconditionnelle des otages qui, eux aussi, ainsi que leurs familles, doivent pouvoir se retrouver enfin sains et saufs. Leur capture lors des actes terroristes du 7 octobre que la Suisse a fermement condamné contrevient au droit international. Le résultat d'aujourd'hui est un appel clair lancé à toutes les parties de cesser les hostilités et de respecter pleinement, enfin, leurs obligations en vertu du droit international, notamment du droit international humanitaire et des droits humains. Pour une mise en œuvre efficace de la résolution que nous venons d'adopter, le cessez-le-feu immédiat devra sans attendre mener à un cessez-le-feu durable. De même, étant donné les conséquences humanitaires catastrophiques qu'aurait une opération de large envergure à Rafah sur la population civile et les opérations humanitaires, une telle opération doit être évitée. Monsieur le Président, le secrétaire général, hier au passage de Rafah, a dit « Il est temps de faire taire les armes ». L'espoir, c'est d'être capable de voir la lumière malgré les ténèbres. Avec l'adoption de la résolution aujourd'hui, il est maintenant grand temps de reprendre espoir et de travailler ensemble, sans relâche, à une perspective de paix durable, une solution à 2 États où Israéliens et Palestiniens peuvent vivre côte à côte en paix, en sécurité et en dignité. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席先生。主席先生，中方对刚才的决议草案投了赞成票。我们感谢阿尔及利亚、莫桑比克等非常任理事国所做出的努力。上周五，安理会就美国提出的另一份关于加沙局势的决议草案进行表决，中方同阿尔及利亚、俄罗斯一道投了反对票。对比两项草案，可以看出区别所在。当前的草案态度鲜明，方向明确，要求立即停火。前一份草案却拐弯抹角，含混其辞。当前的草案要求无条件停火，前一份草案 却为停火设置前提。当前的草案反映了国际社会普遍期待，得到阿拉伯国家集体支持。前一份草案却遭到阿拉伯国家的共同反对。两份草案分歧点，归根到底不是别的，而是要不要立即无条件停火，能不能允许对加沙民众的集体惩罚继续下去。在这个问题上，中方同国际社会大多数成员一样，从一开始态度就是非常明确的。无论是上周五投反对票，还是今天投赞成票，都是基于我们一以贯之的立场和主张。美国在多次否决安理会行动之后，终于决定不再阻挠安理会要求立即停火的努力。尽管如此，美方仍然寻找种种借口，对中国进行指责。国际社会的眼睛是雪亮的，美方的指责完全站不住脚。恰恰相反，正是中国和有关国家坚持原则、主持正义，才迫使美国认识到，美不能也无法再继续阻挠安理会朝着正确方向迈出关键步伐。正义终将胜利。主席先生，加沙冲突爆发近6个月，32000多无辜平民被夺去生命。对于已经逝去的生命，安理会今天的决议来得太迟了。但对于上百万仍深陷前所未有人道灾难的加沙民众来说，这项决议如果能得到全面有效落实，还是可以带来期待已久的希望。安理会决议是有约束力的，我们要求当事方履行联合国宪章规定的义务，根据决议要求采取应有行动。我们期待有重要影响的国家对当事方发挥积极作用，包括采取一切有效手段支持决议的实施。为此，必须立即停止一切伤害平民的行为，必须立即制止对加沙的进攻。在3月实现停火只是第一步，必须以此为基础，迈向持久停战，让被迫逃离的加沙民众早日返回家园。同时，必须立即解除对加沙的封锁和对人道物资准入的人为设障，保障人道物资充足、快速进入加沙，安全及时送到有需要的民众手中。我们赞赏古特雷斯秘书长和联合国人道机构所做出的努力。以色列应该全面配合开放拉法和其他陆地口岸。联合国近东巴勒斯坦难民救济和工程处对加沙民众获得国际人道援助不可或缺，无法替代。我们敦促各方尽快全面恢复对工程处的共资。以色列近期对工程处和整个联合国系统发起了恶意攻击，我们对此坚决反对。我们欢迎埃及、卡塔尔、美国推动释放人质的努力，期待全部人质 和被扣押人员尽快获释，早日回家。主席先生，安理会要在今天通过的决议基础上，继续密切关注加沙局势，为采取进一步必要行动做好准备，确保决议得到及时、充分的执行。中方将继续同各方一道，为早日平息加沙战火、缓解人道灾难、落实两国方案做出不懈努力。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, presidente. El Ecuador condena los ataques terroristas en Moscú y expresamos nuestra solidaridad a las familias de las víctimas y al pueblo ruso. Señor presidente, el proyecto que hemos considerado nació como una idea de los miembros elegidos de preparar un texto que pueda ser aceptable para todos los miembros del Consejo y le permita pronunciarse oportunamente frente a una situación humanitaria en constante deterioro. Por esto, el texto es corto y demanda un cese al fuego por el mes del Ramadán, que permita aliviar la situación de la población civil, al tiempo que exige la liberación inmediata e incondicional de todos los rehenes y deplora la violencia contra civiles y todos los actos de terrorismo, incluyendo implícitamente los execrables actos cometidos por Hamás en octubre pasado. Asimismo, el texto toma notas de los denodados esfuerzos que vienen realizando Egipto, Qatar y Estados Unidos para lograr un acuerdo entre las partes en el conflicto que esperamos sean exitosos. El Ecuador ha votado a favor de este proyecto de resolución y se alegra de que haya sido adoptado. Valoramos la flexibilidad demostrada en esta ocasión por todos los miembros ante una situación tan apremiante como la que se vive en Gaza. Debemos ahora todos velar por la implementación completa, efectiva e inmediata de lo que hemos decidido. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Guyana condemns the terrorist attack that occurred in Moscow last week and also extend our condolences to the government and people of Russia. Mr. President, colleagues, Guyana is pleased that this Council has finally been able to adopt a resolution which demands an immediate ceasefire, albeit for the month of Ramadan, leading to a lasting and sustainable ceasefire. After more than 5 months of a war of utter terror and destruction, a ceasefire is the difference between life and death for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and others. This demand comes at a significant time as Palestinians are observing the holy month of Ramadan. Sadly, this year's Ramadan is different for Palestinians, fatally different. The observance began as people weep over the killing of their loved ones, while bombs and bullets continue to fall indiscriminately around them. 17,000 children began Ramadan as orphans owing to this war. 70,000 families began Ramadan without a home, all rubble. Another 290,000 homes severely damaged. Instead of being in their homes, the sacred place where they usually pray, break fast, and commune with family and friends during this holy month, 3/4 of the population of Gaza are internally displaced. Ramadan is also a time for families to join for nightly feasts and a time to share food and other blessings with the less fortunate. But for the people in Gaza, there is man-made starvation, and we are already seeing evidence of a man-made famine. All of this when there is food available, but deliberately withheld. Women and children are disproportionately impacted. They represent the majority of those killed. Children and pregnant and lactating women are at higher risk of mortality due to lack of adequate nutrition. At the same time, the anguish of the families of the hostages held in Gaza continues to mount with no clear prospect for the return of their loved ones. Palestinians experience the same anguish waiting for their relatives who are illegally detained in Israel to come home. Guyana emphasizes the demand for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. We also demand the release of all Palestinians held in Israeli jails without trial. Mr. President, colleagues, the realities that the population of Gaza has been facing since 7th of October have worsened with each passing day as the occupying power continues its atrocities. Given these realities and the consensus by elected members of this council that we must act, Guyana unhesitatingly collaborated with fellow elected members to put forward this draft resolution for an immediate ceasefire, the unconditional release of hostages, and for expanding humanitarian assistance. In this regard, we thank the coordinator of the E10, His Excellency Ambassador Pedro Comissario, and the delegation of Mozambique for their leadership of this process. We also thank our E10 colleagues and our P5 colleagues for finally, collectively, doing right by the Palestinian people. It is long overdue, but it is still the right thing to have done to stop the indignities against the Palestinian people. But this is just the beginning. The task before us now is to secure full compliance with this resolution and its predecessors, including 2712 and 2720. In this regard, Guyana calls for full adherence to these resolutions. Finally, Mr. President, dear colleagues, the holy month of Ramadan will end in a mere 15 days. It is therefore essential that this Council and those with influence on the parties immediately redouble efforts to bring about the lasting and sustainable ceasefire this resolution calls for, to secure the release of hostages and to massively scale up humanitarian assistance. This is absolutely necessary to save lives, begin the reconstruction of Gaza, and to create a free state of Palestine with which Israel peacefully coexists. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, Sierra Leone also expresses deepest condolences to the government and people of the Russian Federation following the heinous terrorist attacks last week. Terrorism and acts of terrorism in all forms and manifestation are condemnable and unjustifiable. Mr. President, the consideration and adoption of Resolution 2728, co-penned by the elected 10 members of the Council, including Sierra Leone, was born out of the need to address the current plight of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, especially during this holy month of Ramadan, a time traditionally filled with peace, love, and devotion amongst families and communities. We recognize the Palestinian people's collective struggle, facing each day in hardship, loss, displacement, and hunger. With that in mind, the E10 initiated the resolution just adopted, built on the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, including the responsibility of the Security Council in the United Nations Collective Security Scheme. With a clear imperative to act as mandated, but also with the establishment of a moral and political imperative, the Security Council demands an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, respected by all parties, leading to a lasting, sustainable ceasefire. The fighting must stop. The killings must stop. The suffering and collective punishment must end. The parties to the conflict are under obligation to respect this demand of the Security Council. The parties are urged to fully implement this resolution 2728, as well as resolutions 2712 and 2720. States with influence are urged to apply the necessary pressure on the parties to implement these resolutions. We continue to support the diplomatic efforts of Egypt, Qatar, and United States as complementary to the effort and clear demand of the Security Council. The resolution just adopted also demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as ensuring humanitarian access to address their medical and other humanitarian needs, recalling that the taking of hostages is prohibited under international law. Mr. President, The resolution just adopted further demands the parties to the conflict to comply with their obligations under international law in relation to all persons they detain. This is reinforced by the reiteration of the Council's demand for the parties to comply with their obligation under international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law, to protect all civilians, deploy attacks against civilians and civilian objects, violence and hostilities against civilians, and all acts of terrorism. Recognize that half of the population in the Gaza Strip are facing acute food shortages with the imminent risk of famine. The emphasis on the urgent need to expand the flow of humanitarian assistance to and reinforce the protection of civilians in the entire Gaza Strip is most significant. This demand is further reinforced by the reiteration of the further demand for the lifting of all barriers to the provision of humanitarian assistance at scale. The focus on the humanitarian needs of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip is aimed at restoring their human dignity. In a similar way, the resolution recognizes the dignity of the hostages and the detainees. Mr. President, Sierra Leone abstained on the vote on the oral amendment proposed by the Russian Federation, even though noting the explanation by the Russian Federation, but compelled to ensure that the objective of demanding an immediate ceasefire is met. The conflict impacts both Israel and Palestinian civilians. Therefore, the demand for an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan must lead to a lasting, sustainable ceasefire. It must lead to a permanent cessation of hostilities, and for Israel and Palestine to live side by side in peace, security, and stability. The ceasefire must lead towards the path of a two-state solution. We will continue in our resolve and support for the two-state solution, the only viable pathway to end the occupation and resolve this prolonged conflict. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
President, I'd like to start by offering the UK's sincere condolences for the terrorist attack at the Crocus City Hall near Moscow. Our deepest sympathy goes to the families of the many victims. President, the United Kingdom has long been calling for an immediate humanitarian pause leading to a sustainable ceasefire without a return to destruction, fighting, and loss of life as the fastest way to get hostages out and aid in. That is what this resolution calls for and why the United Kingdom voted yes on this text. President, Israel continues to reckon with the brutal horror of the October 7 attacks, and innocent hostages continued to be held by Hamas in Gaza. Israel has a right to defend itself and ensure such an attack can never happen again. We regret that this resolution has not condemned the terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas on the 7th of October. The UK condemns these attacks unequivocally. This resolution sets out the urgent demand for the unconditional release of all hostages, and we welcome the ongoing diplomatic efforts by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States to this end. The intense suffering of innocent Palestinian civilians in Gaza shows no sign of abating, and a humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding before our eyes. The resolution sends a clear and united message on the need for international humanitarian law to be upheld and for aid to be scaled up urgently, including the lifting of all barriers impeding its delivery. President, the UK Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister have reiterated these messages in our contacts with Prime Minister Netanyahu and other senior Israeli political leaders in recent weeks. We call for this resolution to be implemented immediately. President, we need to focus on how we chart the way from an immediate humanitarian pause to a lasting, sustainable peace without a return to fighting. That means the formation of a new Palestinian government for the West Bank and Gaza, accompanied by an international support package. Removing Hamas' capacity to launch attacks against Israel. Hamas no longer being in charge of Gaza. And a political horizon which provides a credible and irreversible pathway towards a two-state solution of Israel and Palestine living side by side in security and peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, уважаемые коллеги, Россия проголосовала за проект резолюции, подготовленный десяткой непостоянных членов Совета Безопасности. Принципиально важно, что СБ ООН впервые требует от сторон соблюдения немедленного прекращения огня, пусть и ограниченного месяцем Рамадан. К сожалению, то, что случится после его окончания, пока остается неясным, поскольку формулировка «lasting» может интерпретироваться по-разному. И это весьма показательно. То есть те, кто покрывает Израиль, хотят по-прежнему оставить ему свободу рук. Очень хочется верить, что эта формулировка будет использована в интересах мира, а не продвижения бесчеловечной операции Израиля против палестинцев. Формулировка permanent была бы более точной, и мы разочарованы, что она не прошла. Но все равно считаем для себя принципиально важным проголосовать за мир. Тем не менее, Совет должен продолжить работать над достижением постоянного прекращения огня. Отмечаем и содержащиеся в резолюции требования немедленного и безусловного освобождения заложников. 22 марта в истории Совета Безопасности была очередная, крайне печальная страница, когда его интригами и шантажом пытались столкнуть по ложному пути и вынудить принять документ, который не только не содержал прямого требования или хотя бы призыва к прекращению огня, но и фактически выдавал, как в тот день выразился постоянный представитель Алжира, лицензию на дальнейшее убийство палестинцев. Этого ни мы, ни наши алжирские и китайские коллеги допустить не могли. С первого дня эскалации в зоне Палестино-израильского конфликта российская делегация призывала членов Совета Безопасности ООН отреагировать на беспрецедентную вспышку насилия четким и недвусмысленным требованием о немедленном постоянном прекращении огня в секторе Газа, выполнив свой мандат по поддержанию международного мира и безопасности. Сегодня в ходе голосования по нашей поправке мы еще раз увидели истинное лицо наших коллег по СБ и убедились в том, кто действительно хочет прекращения, а не приостановки бесчеловечной израильской операции. Хотели бы обратить внимание на следующее. То, что сегодня произошло, это ответ тем, кто критикует право вето у постоянных членов Совета Безопасности. Ведь не примени его 22 марта Россия и Китай, вместо короткого текста, способного остановить насилие в секторе Газа, мы могли бы иметь весьма вредный текст американской резолюции, который не то что не требовал прекращения огня, но и фактически давал Израилю лицензию на продолжение своих действий против палестинцев, в том числе в Рафахе. Хотел бы в завершении напомнить представителям Соединенных Штатов, которые раз за разом обвиняют Совет в неспособности осудить атаку на Израиль, а Россию в неспособности осудить террористическую атаку 7 октября. 18 октября у делегации Соединенных Штатов была возможность принять бразильский проект резолюции с однозначным осуждением событий 7 октября и гуманитарными паузами. Причем в тех формулировках, на которых настаивал Вашингтон. Напомню, что тогда делегация России при голосовании по резолюции воздержалась, а заветировали бразильский текст именно Соединенные Штаты. Поэтому винить вы должны лишь себя. Нельзя возвращаться к этому моменту бесконечно, так как за прошедшие с 7 октября полгода на действия ХАМАС, которые неоднократно осудили все члены Совета Безопасности в национальном качестве, Израиль ответил бесчеловечными преступлениями и коллективным наказанием палестинского народа, в результате чего погибли более 32 тысяч ни в чем не повинных граждан, большинство из которых женщины и дети. Только вдумайтесь в эти цифры. Хочу напомнить и о том, что Россия сразу и недвусмысленно осудила произошедшее 7 октября, и незачем продолжать спекулировать на этой теме. Мы не понаслышке знаем, что такое международный терроризм. К сожалению, мы столкнулись с чудовищным его проявлением звериного лица терроризма снова. Совершенный 22 марта на территории нашей страны террористический акт унес десятки, по крайней мере, 143 ни в чем не повинных жизни, по крайней мере, 143 ни в чем не повинных граждан, которые были хладнокровно расстреляны. И мы сталкивались с такими проявлениями терроризма еще в 90-е годы и понесли тяжелые утраты. Признательны всем тем, кто высказал нам сегодня свои соболезнования. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as a representative of Japan. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic, even during the holy month of Ramadan, with high levels of food insecurity, imminence of famine, and nearly 1.5 million people sheltering in Rafah, struggling each day for their survival. We deeply mourn the tens of thousands of lives lost in the conflict, starting from October 7th terrorist attack and thereafter on the ground. In this vein, it is absolutely essential for the Security Council to demand an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, respected by all parties, leading to lasting, sustainable ceasefire in Gaza. We, all Council members, also need to demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as ensuring humanitarian access to address their medical and other humanitarian needs. This is why Japan, as one of the co-pen holders, has tabled the draft resolution. We welcome the Council was able to pass a resolution proposed by the E10 today. In addition, we strongly support the ongoing diplomatic efforts, in particular the four-party talks towards a ceasefire in connection with the release of all remaining hostages. We believe that ceasefire could pave the path towards sustainable peace and stability in the region, which is what the international community voices to us every day. Japan will continue to work at the Council to achieve that path. I thank you. I resume function as the President of the Council. I now give the floor to the Permanent Observer of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, I wish to begin my statement by conveying deepest condolences to the government, people, and my good friend Vasily. Our condolences of the Russian Federation following the horrific terrorist attack in Moscow. We express our sympathy to the bereaved families and stand in solidarity with our Russian brothers and sisters in these difficult days. Mr. President, it has taken 6 months, over 100,000 Palestinians killed and maimed, 2 million displaced, and famine for this Council to finally demand an immediate ceasefire. A vote for humanity to prevail, for life to prevail. The Palestinians in Gaza pleaded and appealed, shouted, cried, cursed, prayed, defied the odds to survive time and time again, and yet continue to face death, destruction and displacement, deprivation and disease, and an occupation-made famine. They are bombed, besieged, buried under the rubble of the houses they had built. They are killed in their homes, in the streets, in hospitals, in ambulances, in UN shelters, and even in tents. Their ordeal must come to an end and must come to an immediate end now. As we speak, families prepare to break their fast, missing loved ones around the table, and they will find nothing to put on their children's plate. In fact, there is no home sheltering them. There is no table to gather around, and no plates to fill and no food to eat. They lost their homes. They lost loved ones, some of them still trapped under the rubble. Imagine being a parent with kids under the rubble and others alive, feeling broken, but forced to go on for those who remained. Yesterday, Palestinian Christians celebrated Palm Sunday in besieged and destroyed churches that have become shelters in Gaza. They gathered, surrounded by death and praying for resurrection. Palestinian families cannot mourn or heal. They have to find a way to survive and help what is left of their family survive. Mr. President, when such atrocities are being committed in broad daylight against defenseless civilians, including women and children, the right thing to do, the only thing to do morally, legally, politically, is to put an end to it. There can be no justification for war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. Accepting any justification for such crimes is renouncing our humanity and destroying the rule of international law beyond repair. Mr. President, 2 months ago, the highest international court, the ICJ, determined there was a real and imminent risk of irreparable prejudice to the plausible rights of Palestinians under the Genocide Convention. It ordered Israel to undertake immediate measures in relation to its mass and indiscriminate killing of Palestinians, to depriving Palestinians of the essential goods for their survival, to the incitement to genocide. Instead of implementing this mandatory order by the court, Israel has doubled down in the commission of its crimes. Your leaders have said in no uncertain terms that Israel is responsible for the famine underway in Gaza and has used starvation as a method of war. They have called on Israel not to use humanitarian aid as a bargaining chip. They spoke of a man-made disaster, meaning an Israeli occupation-made disaster. They have called repeatedly on Israel to stop its indiscriminate bombing and to spare civilian life to no avail. They have called repeatedly on Israel to give civilians safe haven. Instead, it attacked them even in hospital and UN shelters. It attacked them in the very places it asked them to heed to. It killed them if they stayed and killed them if they left. And now it continues to threaten a ground operation in Rafah, where it has pushed them and confined them at the very edge of the Gaza Strip in yet another attempt to forcibly displace our people. Instead of heeding these calls, Israel has attacked those making them. It continues, in particular, its incitement against the UN, its Secretary General, whom we salute him from this place, its agencies, notably UNRWA, the lifeline for Palestinians in Gaza. The Israeli Foreign Minister wrote that UNRWA cooperates with terrorists and that the UN has become, under the leadership of Antonio Guterres, and I quote, an anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli body that shelters and emboldens terror. Defend the Secretary General and the UN. This outrageous incitement has real-life consequences for UN and humanitarian staff on the ground who are targets of attacks, who are killed, arrested, and tortured, who are humiliated and harassed. It has also real-life consequences for Palestinians, as Israel has used it as a pretext to block humanitarian aid to be distributed by UNRWA. It is time for all these Israeli actions to trigger a serious international reaction, one that enforces consequences for these crimes rather than just make pleas that Israel continues to dismiss. There is no humanity when our lives are treated as expendable. There are no rules without enforcement. And Israel has been treated as a state above the law for so long that it feels it no longer has to hide when acting as an outlaw state. From ethnic cleansing to genocide. Our agony is caused by Israelis' actions, but also by the impunity it has been afforded, by the fact countries have not taken decisive measures to stop it, and many continue to call it and treat it as an ally even while it is committing such atrocities. Mr. President, we express our appreciation to the E10, all of you, for having put forward this resolution, and we welcome its adoption by the Council. We thank Algeria for representing us and all the Arab countries in this endeavor. We salute Arab unity in demanding immediate ceasefire and prevailed. This must be a turning point. This must lead to saving lives on the ground. This must signal the end of this assault of atrocities against our people. A nation is being murdered. A nation is being dispossessed. A nation is being displaced for decades now, but never at this scale since the Nakba. Never this openly, from Tantura to Gaza, from 1948 to 2024, we have endured. We have survived. We have resurrected only to face death once again. Life must prevail in Gaza. Must prevail in Gaza. Freedom must prevail in Palestine. For 6 months now, every single Palestinian in Gaza has endured untold suffering, loss, pain, and tragedy. This must stop now. Palestinian hostages, Palestinian victims are not less deserving of compassion and empathy, of outrage and solidarity. They must be freed from fear and want, from siege and occupation, from death and dispossession. Families must be reunited and start to heal, at least from the wounds that can actually be healed. They must be given the chance to bury their loved ones, to mourn their loss, to rebuild what can be. Even if the ceasefire happened now and the siege was lifted now, it would take generations to deal with the trauma and the devastation. Mr. President, now that this Council has finally called for a ceasefire, all forces should coalesce to make sure it is enforced. Apologies to those who the world has failed, to those that could have been saved and were not. Save the lives of those who survived against all odds. Tell them help is on the way. Hold accountable those who inflicted such suffering upon them. End this injustice. End it now. All of this is long overdue. And I thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at the outset, I want to express my deepest condolences to the Russian people and to the families of all the victims of the heinous terror attack on Friday. Terror must always be condemned in the harshest terms. The Security Council was justifiably quick, very quick, to condemn Friday's terror attack in Russia, just as it was waited no time to condemn the terror attack in Iran against a police station back in December. Yet still, to this day, the Council refuses to condemn the most widespread and barbaric massacre suffered by the Jewish people since the Holocaust. At least 137 people were murdered at Crocus City Concert Hall in Russia on Friday by radical jihadists. And yes, almost 6 months ago, nearly 400 people were murdered at the Nova Music Festival in Israel by the radical jihadists of Hamas. Why does the Security Council discriminate between Russians murdered at a concert and Israelis murdered at a music festival? Civilians, dear colleagues, no matter where they live, deserve to enjoy music in safety and security. And the Security Council should have the moral clarity to condemn such acts of terror equally, without discrimination. Sadly, today as well, this Council refused to condemn the October 7th massacre. This is a disgrace. Colleagues, it was the Hamas massacre that started this war. I repeat, it was the Hamas massacre that started this war. Nearly 6 months have passed, and the Security Council still has not condemned the child-murdering rapists that began this war. The resolution just voted upon makes it seem as if the war started by itself. Well, let me set the record straight. Israel did not start this war, nor did Israel want this war. Israel disengaged and withdrew from Gaza 18 years ago. We wanted a ceasefire and coexistence. You can repeat here slogans and purport to know for the Palestinians what the Palestinians seek, but this won't make it the truth or the reality. The Palestinian representative here is lying through his teeth when he says that his people want to live side by side with Israel. By the way, as you probably know, he does not represent Hamas, he does not represent the Gazans. They did not choose him to speak for them. His leader, President Abbas, refuses to even condemn the massacre, and he continued to pay terrorists. After Israel withdrew from Gaza, the Palestinians elected Hamas, a terrorist organization. They elected a terror organization. Hamas converted every inch of Gaza into a terror war machine, right under the UN's nose, maybe with the help of some of the UN's agencies like UNRWA. And Hamas initiated ceaseless attacks on Israeli civilians throughout the past 18 years. Thousands and thousands of indiscriminate rockets and missiles at civilians. Today, Hamas is the most popular movement among Palestinians. And according to every poll, the vast majority of Palestinians support Hamas's massacre on October 7th, not only in Gaza, also in Judea and Samaria. This is the reality you should face and you should address. Colleagues, while the resolution fails to condemn Hamas, it does state something that should have been the driving moral force. This resolution denounces the taking of hostages, recalling that it is in violation of international law. Taking innocent civilian hostage is a war crime, and there is no arguing that this is what Hamas has committed. The release of the hostages should have been the #1 priority. When it comes to bringing the hostages home, the Security Council must not settle for words alone, but take action, real action. It is unfathomable that when it comes to releasing the hostages, we still only see inaction. Not a single step has been taken by the Council, aside from symbolic words. Yet, when it comes to the situation in Gaza, the Council rushed to take action. You appointed a special coordinator and established a monitoring mechanism. The Council visited Rafah to see the aid shipments firsthand, and the Secretary General has already visited Rafah crossing twice. Why do our hostages not receive concrete action? What have you done to advance their release? Colleagues, following this Council's adoption of UNSCR 2712 and 2720, which both called for the release of all hostages, Hamas did not stop to even contemplate for even one moment. It should be very clear that as long as Hamas refuses to release the hostages in the diplomatic channels, there is no other way to secure their return other than through a military operation. So on the one hand, the resolution says that taking civilian hostages is in violation of international law, yet On the other hand, despite the fact that you know Hamas won't listen to your calls and release the hostages, you demand a ceasefire. Take a moment and think about this moral contradiction. Your demand for a ceasefire without conditioning it on the release of the hostages not only is not helpful, but it undermines the efforts to secure their release. It is harmful to these efforts because it gives Hamas terrorists the hope to get a ceasefire without releasing the hostages. All members of the Council, all members should have voted against this shameful resolution. Mr. President, where are these Council's actions? Why don't you designate Hamas as a terror organization? Even if there are Council members here who would prevent this due to their political alliances with Hamas leadership, where are the moral efforts to advance such a designation? I wish to suggest an alternative text that should have been adopted by the Council if it wasn't so biased against Israel. The Security Council strongly condemns and deplores all abuses of human rights and, where applicable, violations of international humanitarian law by the terrorist group, including those involving violence against civilian populations, notably women and children, kidnapping, killing, hostage-taking, pillaging, rape, sexual slavery and other sexual violence, recruitment of children and destruction of civilian property. The Security Council demands that the terrorist group immediately and unequivocally cease all hostilities and all abuses of human rights and violations of international humanitarian law and disarm and demobilize. The Security Council demands the immediate and unconditional release of all those abducted who remain in captivity. The Security Council recognizes that some of such acts may amount to crimes against humanity. Well, colleagues, I did not draft this text. You know who did? This Council. This is the resolution adopted by the Council 10 years ago when Boko Haram kidnapped the schoolgirls in Nigeria. So I ask you again, why can this Council call on Boko Haram to lay down their arms, but the same cannot be demanded of the murderous Hamas terrorists? Is the life of little baby Kfir Bibas worth less than the life of a Nigerian child? Sadly, it's for the same reason why you can condemn terror attacks in Russia and Iran, but not in Israel. To this Council, Israeli blood is cheap. This is a travesty, and I'm disgusted. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Yemen.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. أتشرف بإلقاء هذا البيان نيابة عن المجموعة العربية، وأود أن أهنئكم وبلدكم الصديق اليابان على تولي رئاسة المجلس لهذا الشهر، وأعرب لكم عن الشكر لعقد هذه الجلسة. أتقدم بخالص التعازي لأخ العزيز فاسيلي وإلى كافة وفد روسيا الاتحادية وإلى الحكومة والشعب الروسي الصديق على نتيجة الحادث الإرهابي الجبان والذي أسفر عن قتل وجرح العشرات من المدنيين. ندين بأشد العبارات هذا العمل الإرهابي وندين الإرهاب بكافة أشكاله وصوره. تتقدم المجموعة العربية بالشكر للدول المنتخبة الإيتن على تقديمها لمشروع هذا القرار المركز والإنساني والذي تم اعتماده للتو من قبل هذا المجلس الموقر، والذي يدعو بشكل واضح وصريح إلى وقف فوري لإطلاق النار في غزة خلال شهر رمضان المبارك يقود لوقف دائم ومستدام لوقف إطلاق النار، ذلك كون هذا هو المطلب الأكثر إلحاحاً وضرورة طالبت وتطالب به المجموعة العربية والمجتمع الدولي كافة، لا سيما في ظل التدهور الخطير والكارثي للوضع الإنساني في غزة، والذي لم يعد مقبولا ولا يمكن السكوت عليه أكثر من ذلك. تتوجه المجموعة العربية بالشكر والتقدير لكافة الدول الأعضاء في المجلس، والتي انخرطت بإيجابية في المفاوضات المتعلقة بمشروع هذا القرار، وتثمن موقف الدول الأعضاء التي صوتت لصالح مشروع هذا القرار الإنساني الملح. ترحب المجموعة العربية باعتماد مجلس الأمن للقرار 2728 الذي أعطى الأولوية للأبعاد الإنسانية في محاولة لإنقاذ مئات الآلاف من الفلسطينيين، الأمر الذي يعيد لهذا المجلس دوره في تحمل مسؤولياته القانونية والأخلاقية والاطلاع بمهامه في صون السلم والأمن الدوليين وإيقاف حمام الدم في غزة. كما تشدد المجموعة العربية على أنه يجب النظر إلى هذا القرار على أنه خطوة أولى يجب البناء عليها بقرار آخر ملزم ينص على الوقف الفوري لإطلاق النار والمستدام في قطاع غزة، وذلك لإلزام إسرائيل بالوقف الفوري غير المشروط للحرب التي تشنها على قطاع غزة. تؤكد المجموعة العربية أن الجهود الجارية للتوصل لاتفاق حول تبادل الأسرى والمحتجزين وإقرار هدنة لا يمكن أن تتعارض مع المطالب بالوقف الفوري لإطلاق النار، بل إن هذا المطلب يسهم في تسهيل وتعزيز هذه المساعي. السيد الرئيس، لقد ظل هذا المجلس رهينا للحسابات السياسية والمصالح الضيقة التي تتجاهل الحق الإنساني والقانوني في الحفاظ على الأرواح وحقن الدماء وإيصال المساعدات العاجلة إلى مستحقيها دون عوائق، والتي هي من صميم مسؤوليات ومهام هذا المجلس. أن اعتماد هذا القرار اليوم من قبل هذا المجلس جاء كاستجابة متأخرة للضحايا الفلسطينيين ولمطالبات العالم أجمع في الوقف الفوري لإطلاق النار في قطاع غزة. لذا نرجو من خلاله أن يتم العمل الجدي بعدم الاكتفاء بوقت مؤقت لإطلاق النار، بل الوصول إلى وقف شامل وبشكل نهائي لإطلاق النار، والسماح بدخول كافة المساعدات الإنسانية إلى غزة دون عوائق، ووقف جريمة التهجير القسري التي تستهدف الفلسطينيين لاقتلاعهم من أرضهم ووطنهم. ويؤكد أن سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي لا تملك شيكا على بياض يتيح الاستمرار في ارتكاب المجازر اليومية بحق الأطفال والنساء ومنع دخول المساعدات الإنسانية وتهجير الفلسطينيين قسريا. تدعو المجموعة العربية للامتثال فورا للقرار الصادر هذا اليوم، وتحذر من مغبة إقدام الاحتلال الإسرائيلي على تنفيذ خططه بالهجوم البري على مدينة رفح، الملاذ الأخير لأكثر من 1.5 مليون نازح فلسطيني، الأمر الذي سيسبب كارثة إنسانية غير مسبوقة. وفي الوقت الذي تجدد المجموعة العربية موقفها الرافض لسياسة الانحياز والتستر على مخططات سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي وتوفير الحماية لها على حساب أرواح أكثر من 32 ألف شهيد وأكثر من 72 ألف جريح، معظمهم من النساء والأطفال سقطوا في قطاع غزة خلال أكثر من 5 أشهر فقط من العدوان الإسرائيلي الغاشم. فإن المجموعة ترفض بشدة ازدواجية المعايير المتبعة والتي تطيل من أمد الصراع في ظل الفشل الذريع في تنفيذ أي قرارات متعلقة بها منذ 75 عاماً. كما تطالب المجموعة العربية مجدداً بالتنفيذ الكامل لجميع قرارات مجلس الأمن ذات الصلة، بما في ذلك قراري المجلس 2712 2720 للعام 2023. السيد الرئيس، لم تكتف سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي بجرائمها وعدوانها وحرب الإبادة التي ترتكبها في حق السكان المدنيين في قطاع غزة منذ 7 أكتوبر، لا سيما النساء والأطفال، بل قد صبت الزيت على النار من خلال انتهاكها سياسة التجويع بحق الشعب الفلسطيني، لتزيد من رصيد جرائمها المرتكبة ضد الإنسانية وانتهاكها الصارخ. وعليه فإن المجموعة العربية تطالب هذا المجلس بمحاسبة إسرائيل على جرائمها، وأن يتم فرض عقوبات صارمة على كافة المستوطنين في الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة بما في ذلك القدس الشرقية الذين يمارسون العنف ضد الشعب الفلسطيني أو يقومون بالتحريض عليه. كما أن على الاحتلال الإسرائيلي أن يتحمل تبعات هذا العدوان الغاشم والمجازر الوحشية ضد أبناء غزة، وأن يتحمل مسؤولية إعادة إعمار ما دمرته آلته العسكرية الوحشية، ودفع التعويضات لكافة الضحايا الذين سقطوا نتيجة هذا العدوان. ختاما السيد الرئيس، تؤكد المجموعة العربية أنها ستواصل تحركاتها على المستويات كافة وفي كل المحافل حتى يتحمل هذا المجلس مسؤولياته المناطة به، وحتى يتم تنفيذ بنود هذا القرار المتمثلة في وقف إطلاق النار الفوري والسماح لكافة المساعدات الإنسانية بالمرور دون معوقات، وحتى تتوقف سياسة التهجير القسري ضد الشعب الفلسطيني وتوفير الحماية الدولية للفلسطينيين في كافة الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة، ومحاسبة إسرائيل القوة القائمة بالاحتلال على كافة جرائمها التي ترتكبها بحق الشعب الفلسطيني. كما تطالب المجموعة العربية كافة الدول والمنظمات الدولية بالاعتراف ودون إبطاء بالدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة ذات السيادة على حدود 4 حزيران 67 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية، وقبول فلسطين كدولة كاملة العضوية بالأمم المتحدة وأجهزتها المختلفة، وذلك لإنهاء معاناة هذا الشعب وإرجاع بعض من حقوقه غير القابلة للتصرف والتي سلبت منه على مدار العقود الماضية، حتى يعيش الفلسطينيون في دولتهم المستقلة المعترف بها دوليا كاملة العضوية في الأمم المتحدة كغيرهم من شعوب العالم. شكرا السيد الرئيس.
I thank the representative of Yemen for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of the speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Finally. Finally.
Everyone, we need more. We need more. We need the
Yes, yes. Where is the president?
Where's Caroline?
Jose, run away.
We need Amar, we need Caroline. Amar, Caroline.
Press take out now.
Oh, Jose, yeah. Amar.
Namar, I think is.
Amar. We need Amar.
Hmm?
28. Oh, a nice number. You should play Lotto.
I wanted to mention all the.
We are good.
You are good?
Yes, don't worry.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I would like to make a statement on behalf of the elected members of the Security Council who are Algeria, Ecuador, Guyana, Japan, Malta, Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, Switzerland, and my own country, Mozambique. It is a historical day for the Council. For the first time ever, we sponsored and the Council adopted the resolution on the question of Palestine. We are happy that the Council has successfully adopted the much-needed resolution to demand the immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages. It also demands that the parties comply with their obligations under international law in relation to all persons that they detain. It is our hope, it is the hope of the E10 that the resolution adopted today will be implemented in good faith by all parties and will help ease the suffering of the population in Gaza. Humanitarian aid must flow immediately and without delay. We also hope that this resolution will pave the way for more positive perspectives towards a lasting peace in the Middle East. Finally, we would like to hail the determination, unity, cohesion, and commitment of all members of the E10 group in tabling the text and conducting an inclusive and transparent discussions throughout the process that, with the cooperation of the permanent members, has led us today to achieve this important goal. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. In her remarks, thank you very much, Ambassador. Nadia Situma from Al Jazeera English. In her remarks to the Security Council following the adoption of the ceasefire, Ambassador of the United States, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, mentioned that this is a non-binding resolution. What is your reaction to those comments?
I will invite other colleagues to respond.
I can respond to that.
We have a legal
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
under the Charter, all Security Council resolutions are binding, and every member states are under the obligation to implement those resolutions. But I still invite the
Maybe legally speaking, it's non-binding because in accordance with the UN Charter, all Security Council decisions must be implemented and legally binding, but this resolution did not use the word decide. And it did not invoke Chapter 7 of the Charter, so legally speaking, it may not be legally binding, but morally, I mean, as I said in my statement, this reflects the consensus of the international community, so it should be implemented.
all United Nations Security Council resolutions are binding and mandatory. I have been a member of the International Law Commission for 15 years and president, and I know what I'm saying.
Thank you,
Okay?
If I,
Yes,
if I
please.
could add, firstly, just to say that it's an important day for E10 unity. And so the question about the binding nature of the resolution is a legal one. And following the view of the permanent representative of Mozambique, who was a member and chair of the ILC, being a legal practitioner myself and being part of the Sixth Committee for over 5 years, I will say it is binding. And it's not just my words, it's also the words of the International Court of Justice in the advisory opinion 1971, advisory opinion given by the ICJ. So I think it should be clear to everyone that this resolution is binding on the parties. Thank you.
Can I follow up on comments about Chapter 7 and how if it's not a Chapter 7 resolution, it's not legally binding, as the ambassador from the Republic of Korea has
I
mentioned?
think you had the answer already.
Thank you very much. Thank you. But I invite you to have some international law with me.
خليه يجي الجزائري. هلا اعزموا اللي بده يجي معنا. اهلا وسهلا. عمار تعال هون. هون هون. هون عمار هون.
لا تفضل انا وراك.
جنبي. وين الرئيس؟ Thank you very much for being with us. It is a historic day today, where for the first time after almost 6 months, the Security Council adopted a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. And we in the Arab group, from the first day of this aggression, were united around 3 objectives. The first objective was an immediate ceasefire to stop the aggression against our people. Today is a significant step in that direction. The second objective was to have humanitarian assistance up to the need of our people in the Gaza Strip. I believe the ceasefire will open the door for the implementation of that second objective. And the third objective was not to allow the crime against humanity from forcefully transferring our people outside the Gaza Strip, although they have been internally forced to move from the north to the center to the south and then to other places in the Gaza Strip. A ceasefire, immediate ceasefire, would allow our people to return to the places where they were displaced from. So I am proud of the unity of the Arab group. I am proud that our representative in the Security Council is Algeria, working closely with us, reflecting the demands of the Arab group, and I think today we prevailed. Those who say that the Security Council is not enforceable or not mandatory, give us a break. We go to the General Assembly, they say it is not enforced or binding. We come to the Security Council, they tell us it's not binding. We do not buy that. Security Council resolutions are binding. And if Israel is not going to implement it, then it is the duty of the Security Council to use Chapter 7 to take measures and punitive measures in order to make them obey the resolution of the Security Council. We are not done. We salute our people in Gaza and in all of Palestine. All of our people, all of their leaders, we are one as Palestinians. We survived this ordeal. We will rebuild Gaza. We are very proud and resilient people. And thank you for covering our story during these 5.5 months, and we are not done. We will go back to the Security Council tomorrow. We will ask them to defend the brave Secretary General who is with us today in refugee camps of the Palestinians in Jordan. He is the one who went to Rafah twice. He is the one who met with the leaders of Egypt, of Jordan, of Palestine, of all the Arabs, calling for a humanitarian ceasefire from early after the aggression. And he today called from Jordan, implement the Security Council resolution that was adopted just a few minutes ago. We salute him. We will defend him. We will defend the agencies of the United Nations, and we will ask the Security Council tomorrow to issue a statement or a position defending the Secretary General and the UN agencies. And we will not be done. We will continue the march, and we will start working on a draft resolution to make sure that Rafah will not be invaded. Rafah should be protected. We should not create a horrific humanitarian situation or crimes in Rafah to push our people outside Rafah in the direction of Egypt. So we are not done. We will continue working. The unity of the Arab group is playing a tremendous role in the unity in the Security Council, especially among the 10, and we will continue working and we will keep you informed. Talal, you are first, number one.
Thank you so much. What's your comment on what the American ambassador, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, said, that any release, any ceasefire must be accompanied by the release of all, unconditional release of all hostages, knowing very well by many, and they argue, that if all hostages were released, there's nothing to stop Israel from going the whole way.
Well, Israel has to abide by its obligation and the charter, and it has to immediately stop the fighting. This is what the resolution called, immediate ceasefire. Any member can interpret as they wish, but the law is the law. The language of the resolution is crystal clear, an immediate ceasefire. Therefore, an immediate ceasefire has to be put in place.
But the resolution also calls for unconditional, immediate release of hostages. Now, the many people in the Middle East say, what guarantees are, once the hostages, all hostages are released, what guarantees do we have that Israel will not go the whole way to Rafah, more destructions? What stops Israel from doing that?
I understand the frustration of our people, and they have the right to be frustrated from the international community that dragged its feet for 5.5 months before they agreed to a ceasefire. But the language of the resolution is crystal clear. Operative paragraph 1 starts from demanding an immediate ceasefire. The second part of the sentence, it is not conditional upon the first part. It says, and also it calls for the other part. The other part was reflected in all the resolutions in the Security Council, adopted in the Security Council, and the resolutions adopted in the 10th emergency session twice in the General Assembly. All of us are saying immediate ceasefire, and in fact, our brothers and sisters, Egypt, Qatar, are negotiating with the United States and others, and negotiating and mediating with our brothers, Hamas, the release of the hostages and exchange of prisoners. So that principle is not being rejected by all of us, provided that there is a release of the Palestinian detainees, especially those who are serving life sentence. And I think that that will happen, and we hope that it happens very soon. And we are behind Egypt and Qatar, who are playing a very important role in the mediation and the negotiation in order to have a deal. So that is not something that is rejected by the Arabs or by those who are negotiating this agreement on that deal. You asked a lot of questions before, but if there's a woman before you that wants to ask a question, would have the right. I don't see anyone.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador.
You're the last one.
Thank you. Anadi Satuma from Al Jazeera English. During the meeting, Prime Minister Netanyahu indicated that he was going to cancel a visit to D.C. in reaction to the Security Council adoption. What is your comment on the fact that it seems that negotiations on the ground for a deal are going in the opposite direction, not towards a deal, in reaction to this resolution?
I don't really know what the negotiation on the ground entails. I'm not involved in it. My job is to work at the UN, including the Security Council, to produce resolutions like the one that we produced. That is my job. Now, with regard to the relationship between Netanyahu and the current administration in Washington, D.C., we leave it up to them to respond to his, disrespectful way of behaving with the country that is responsible for the survival of Israel, and arming Israel, and giving it, ammunition, and giving it billions of dollars to continue the atrocities against our people. They have to stand up and respond to him. That is not my job to respond to that. It is their job. Thank you very much for being with us.
I understand that you go to the General Assembly and it's not binding, that you come here and it's not binding, but we just witnessed how two different ambassadors interpreted this resolution in two different ways.
I think that interpretation is among lawyers and legal experts over this issue. There are differences of opinions, but the law is the law. The Charter demands from all member states to honor and respect and implement Security Council resolutions. And my brother Mahmoud is the legalist among us. But let me also add, just in case that a country rebel against Security Council resolution, it makes then sense that the Security Council that has tools available to them to resort to Chapter 7 to take measures in order to force that rebel country to comply with Security Council resolution. But my brother Mahmoud can respond.
Thank you. I mean, the ambassador has summed it perfectly. Article 25 of the Charter says clearly that the members of the United Nations shall carry out the decisions of the Security Council. The language used in OP1 is demand language. It's a binding language which is based on Article 25 of the Charter. As such, it is a mandatory resolution that has to be carried out. If you're talking about Chapter 7, when we use Chapter 7, it is for enforceable measure. If a country violates international law in a manner that threatens international peace and security, you can use force or impose sanctions. This is what Chapter 7 is about. So that's a difference.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you. نعم. الواحد
Good afternoon. I wanted to say that so the UK, including my Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, have long called for an immediate humanitarian pause as the fastest way to get the hostages out and to get more aid into Gaza, leading to a sustainable ceasefire and progress towards long-term peace. That is what this resolution calls for, and it's why we voted in favour of it today. And we call on for the implementation of the resolution to be immediate. We regret that the resolution did not condemn the terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas on the 7th of October. We condemn these attacks unequivocally, and the Council should do so too. Palestinians in Gaza are living through a humanitarian catastrophe. The situation will not improve until more aid can get in, and my Prime Minister and my Foreign Secretary have been clear in their engagements with Israel that all barriers to aid delivery need to be lifted. We have not yet seen the improvements that we need to get more aid in. The Council's message today is an important one, and I reiterate, we call for it to be implemented immediately. Thank you.
There's been some discussion about whether this resolution is binding or non-binding. What does Britain think? And given that you've abstained on previous resolutions, you've now voted in favour. Does this signal any kind of British frustration with Israel?
So, in our view, this resolution needs to be implemented immediately. I said that in my explanation of vote. It sends a clear Council message, a united Council message, and we expect all Council resolutions to be implemented. This one is not any different, and the demands in the resolution are absolutely clear. The humanitarian pause leading to a sustainable ceasefire, the release of the hostages, international humanitarian law and humanitarian aid in. And on the second part of your question, this resolution is completely consistent with my Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary's position. You know, as I said, they've been calling for a long time for a humanitarian pause as a way to get hostages out and aid in, leading to a sustainable ceasefire and then a long-term solution. And we see this resolution as a very important step on that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Israel has indicated that they will no longer be letting aid convoys to the north of Gaza. Do you have any reaction to that?
So, as I said, one important part of this resolution is that we call for humanitarian aid for all of the barriers that are impeding humanitarian aid access to be lifted. And again, my Foreign Secretary and my Prime Minister have been unequivocal and robust with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and senior Israelis that those barriers need to be lifted. Thank you.